You are now watching Lesage, the best place to learn about competitive Pokemon TCG. Let's get it! Yo, what's poppin' peeps? Welcome back to the channel. Lesage here, and we're going to be covering over the best decks in our standard format. I cover over the best decks every single Monday at noon Eastern time, so be sure to check that out. If you like those type of videos, give this video a thumbs up, like, subscribe to the channel. We are just so close to 6,100 subscribers, and we'd love to get to our next stretch goal of 7,500, so let's get there. And let me know in the comments below if there's any decks that you saw here that you liked, that you didn't like. Let's spark a discussion. There's been a lot of change in our top 10 decks, and we'll see exactly how it goes. That being said, let's jump into our number 10 spot. Jumping into our number 10 spot and falling from our previously number 7th, and I mean, a few weeks ago or even before Evolving Skies or Standard came, this was quite frequently one of the best decks in format. We have Shadow Rider Calyrex VMAX. Oh, how the mighty has fallen. Now, this deck has fallen due to a combination of a lot of the top decks in the metagame featuring cards that really stop this deck. Path to the Peak being some of them, or Umbreon VMAX, or even things like the Galarian Moltres V featured in Sylveon decks. These are all things that can necessarily drop a top deck down. So when the metagame fights you out of the top, you have nowhere else to fall except the bottom. Now, that means things need to settle at the top, and as the metagame changes, and with Single Strike doing well, Leafeon's doing a little bit better, and that might mean that Leafeon loses Shadow Rider, which I think it does. Shadow Rider can then rise to the top by climbing against those other decks that by nature have to kind of fill in their spots, because obviously there's always 10 spots. I think Shadow Rider is one of those decks that this is the lowest it can go. I don't think it can necessarily go any lower. I mean, fingers crossed for me. I'm a huge Shadow Rider fan that this deck does a little bit better. I think it's actually pretty well positioned in this format, and not enough players are really playing it. This deck beats most decks on the list. I did recently cut out Phoebe and Palpad from this deck because Zacian is also falling, and Decidueye is really nowhere to be found right now. But again, these are all things that can change in our current metagame. So right now, Shadow Rider's in number 10. Lots of opportunities to move upwards. If you like Shadow Rider, don't let this deter you from playing the deck. I think there's still plenty of great matchups out there for you to hit, and this list is an absolute banger. Sliding into our number 9 spot and jumping up from 10 last week is Ice Rider Calyrex VMAX. Now, this is the kind of hybrid Ice Rider Suicune deck that has been seeing a little bit of success here and there. I mean, it moved up a spot, but it's not necessarily really jumping up huge. I think it's one of those things where this deck is similarly neutral to the Suicune Ludicolo deck, but it doesn't necessarily have the same damage output. When playing this deck, I feel like it's very good. I just haven't necessarily had the opportunity to give it a whirl in a tournament, if that makes sense. Like, it's one of those things where I want to have some real tournament hours with this deck to let peeps know how I truly feel, but in the few testing games that I've played with this deck and creating this list and stuff like that, I felt this deck felt very similar to Tempo Zard or Blacephalon, Reshiram and Charizard, GX kind of deck that went well pretty last format. Like, I don't know, it was a good deck, and then obviously Welder got rotated. But that being said, it's one of those things where this deck seems underappreciated in the metagame. If anything, I could see this moving up a little bit more. However, due to the popular vote, I think this deck is going to stay a lower top 10 deck for the foreseeable future. Jumping into our number 8 spot and absolutely falling from number 2 the previous week is Sylveon VMAX. Now, this is one that caught me off guard a little bit, but when it comes to making these lists, I have to go based off of my ideas as a professional Pokemon TCG player, and I have to go by tournament data available from the Play Limitless website. So if anyone wants to understand how my calculations work, I give every single tournament a value as long as they have 50 or more participants. So 50 to 128 players have a certain value, 129 to 256, 257 to 512, and 512 plus. So out of the events that I observed, there was many events that did not feature a lot of Sylveons doing well in the top 8s, 16s, 32s, depending on how many players there were. And it just seems like Sylveon is one of those things where if you hit the right matchups and you hit the right combo pieces, you're absolutely having a smashing day. Sylveon VMAX, of course, is going to do great against a Rapid Strike Urshifu deck, and Rapid Strike Urshifu is going to do well against a Jolteon deck, and Blaziken against a Zacian deck. I'm sure you get the point now. You play the right techs for the right matchups. But if you can't get Galarian Moltres V out against a Shadow Rider deck, you're getting absolutely just demolished. Like, there is nothing your deck does against that deck. So if you have the wrong pieces or the right pieces at the right or wrong time, you might just be missing the cards that you need. So I think where this deck is failing is that it currently has too much going on, does not have the right consistency mix, and does not have the current pool of available cards to consistently hit it. So when everyone was playing this deck, of course it was spiking tournaments, and lists are becoming more refined, matchups are becoming a little bit more notable. I think it's really one of those things where Sylveon is kind of falling as a deck because other decks are growing, and this deck is already so advanced in terms of where our metagame was and players were testing it, that now that Single Strike and Dragapult, they have better options and they're able to kind of take these decks down now. I think that this deck could go up for sure, but this is really one of those, it's probably going to be a very spiky deck. This is the type of deck, if it spikes a chill event or a late night series, of course it's going to do well. If it does not, then it's probably just going to fail miserably in the process, being a lower top 10 deck. So expect this deck to jump around a little bit, but I don't necessarily think it's going to spike up to number 1 or number 2 like it previously was. Skipping into our number 7 spot, and previously at number 8, we got Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX. Now, this deck has kind of seen all the success in the world with its Players' Cup 3, Players' Cup 4, Players' Cup Invitational win, and I mean, even Azul took this to the Tricky Gym Andrew Mahone Full Grip Games tournament and was able to win the whole thing about a month ago. It's really one of those decks that just can't necessarily beat Dragapult, or it can't necessarily beat some of the other top decks in the formats. So while Mew from Unbroken Bonds was really one of the gatekeepers of this deck, truly seeing success, now that there's more decks that just kind of gatekeep this out of the top 5, existing there, Single Strike, Dragapult, even decks like Suicune I find can hold their own against this deck. It's really one of those things where Rapid Strike Urshifu is just an acceptable deck. It's not the best deck, and we've seen a few players play different versions, maybe Galarian Moltres here or there, or Suicune here and there. I think I just like the plain old version in general. Also, by the way, if you want to get any of the deck lists for any of the top 10 decks, they are in the pinned comment below, so be sure to check those out with reference videos for every single deck this week, so you can copy and paste them into PTCGO, learn more about the deck, all that good stuff. Jumping back into it, Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX, doing a great job spreading things around. Might be better in a Sylveon deck, might be better here. Who really knows? Currently not a top 5 deck. So the way that I look at it, if you're not looking at a top 5 deck, you seriously need to understand your local metagame or whatever tournament that you're playing in order to grab the most out of it. And I mean that with the utmost respect to everyone, but I think that Rapid Strike Urshifu just cannot be it. You'd have to be able to be like, oh, you want to know what? Everyone's playing Jolteon decks or other decks that I would just beat. I don't need to worry about these other decks. This is a great call. And I think that's what you have to look at, whereas the top 5 decks are always likely going to be top 5 decks, and the bottom top 10 decks are great choices, but they're not necessarily going to be as strong of a choice as the top 5 decks. They're going to have to be a metagame choice. So keep that in mind when it comes to deciding upon these decks. Slipping into our number 6 spot and dropping from number 5 last week, we got the Turbo Zacian deck that has basically been in this kind of middle spot since the beginning of our post-rotation Evolving Skies format. I did say last week, and I roasted this deck a little bit, where I'm like, you want to know what? I don't like this deck. I don't think this deck is where it's at. I think a lot of players are just kind of defaulting to this deck because it's easy to build, cheap to play, all that kind of stuff. And I mean, you can cheese wins off opponents without having to do too much. This deck is very top deck reliant. There's not really too much planning in your plays. It's really just like Intrepid Sword, Brave Blade. I'm using Zamazenta against VMAX decks, and that's great. You want to know what? If you're a player that likes playing this deck, that's sick. If you're a player that understands playing this deck and this is your first real deck, that's also sick. But in terms of a top tier metagame or top tier player, this deck is just outclassed by so many of the other decks that have cute little nuances in their strategy that allow you to beat other decks and do all those other things. This is a great intro deck to the Pokemon TCG. I think if there is any deck that you were to be like, here you go, my friend, here's a deck, I'm going to teach you how to play Pokemon, this is the best deck that you could probably show them, because it's easy to play, it's fun to play, it shows popular Pokemon, and it's great. So if you have a kid who's looking to get into Pokemon, or you're new to the game, or you have a friend who wants to get into the game, this is the deck to show them. If you're playing in a tournament, I don't really recommend this deck. I think it's outclassed by a lot of decks, but it's certainly not bad. So if this is your deck, go for it. I'm not really a personal fan of this one at this point. Absolutely blazing into our number 5 spot, all the way from number 9 last week, is Leafeon VMAX. Now, this is one that I necessarily would have never predicted, and I think even last week, I was like, Leafeon VMAX isn't great, it's a little bit of a combo-based deck, and I mean, my thought process on it has not changed too much, because I think that this deck is too reliant on retreat costs, and there's ways to get around it with Air Balloon and stuff like that, right? And it just makes your combo heavier. Like, of course, you have the cards like Tool Jammer, Galar Mine, all that kind of stuff to make Grass Knot do more damage. That's the strategy of this deck. You can search it out with Drizzile, that's all cool. And I mean, maybe I'm a little bit harsh and there's more combo-heavy decks in format. But with other top decks, like Single Strike in formats, and Pokemon that are just randomly weak to Grass, Leafeon VMAX has been able to kind of upgrade itself and do a little bit better time after time. And I think this is really one of those cases where, as the metagame changes and Single Strike continuously becomes the best deck in our format, or one of the best decks in our formats, I think it's quite important to notice that other decks are probably going to get attached to it in the process. So keep that in mind when you come to test these decks and understand the metagame a little bit. Leafeon VMAX can certainly go up, other decks can certainly go up, and it makes for a really interesting metagame. Thrusting into number 4, and staying from number 4 last week, we got Jolteon VMAX. Keeps on destroying the competition. I mean, it came second at the Chill TCG event this week, which was absolutely awesome. And then to top that all off, when you thought that the deck would already have its high of the week, we had Luke, Celio's Network Morsa, able to win the Pokestats event with Jolteon VMAX. So it's really one of those things where this deck is now getting those top performances. It's very consistently up there, and it's competing I always compare this deck to Dragapult, because they both do limited damage to the active and limited damage to the bench. The numbers are very similar. Jolteon VMAX has an extra kind of side effect of having to have damage on something already, but it does do a little bit more damage turn after turn. So as long as you keep the damage output up, the deck's great, and of course having access to cards like Cheryl is amazing. So this deck has it all going on. I really don't see it going down. It just seems to me like it's a top 5 deck at this point, and really should be one of those decks that you are actively considering in the formats. Absolutely sliding into number 3 and all the way up from number 6 last week is Suicune Ludicolo. Now, this deck, I believe, is just shooting up because it has a strong matchup against a lot of the other top decks in format right now. And, of course, Suicune can do... It's just like a neutral deck. That's the best way that I could put it. It doesn't lose to a lot. I mean, of course, you're going to lose to Jolteon. But you have answers to pretty much everything. You don't need to worry about Zamazenta because you are not a VMAX Pokemon. You can have answers to Decidueye by attacking with Ludicolo and stuff like that. Like, you don't necessarily lose to any deck. You could turn your deck into a single prize card and some rare occurrences. You can hit for a lot of damage if you're playing against a VMAX deck. You can draw extra cards. Like, this deck is just a really well-constructed deck, and it's just great. Gabriel Samedo really got this deck correct when they won the Chill Series event and really showed the world this deck a few weeks back. Still kind of like the same build right now. So I'm just about this list. I think it's sick. So give it a whirl if you haven't already. Again, all the deck lists are available in the pinned comment below, so you can copy and paste any of these deck lists right into PTCGO. I put a reference video for each deck with a similar deck list that's being played against other things to show you how to play this deck. So it's some great references in order if you're trying to just learn a little bit more about these decks. Tiptoeing into our number 2 spot and jumping from our number 1 spot last week, falling that 1 spot is Dragapult VMAX. Dragapult VMAX has cemented itself as a top deck ever since Henry Brand really showed us how to be playing this deck in this format, and adding the Crushing Hammer package and other cool cards into this deck really allows it to see a bunch of success. If there's any deck that's been at the top for a while now in this post-rotation deck metagame, it's really this deck, proven itself to be just a solid number 1, number 2 deck, really working with the metagame around it. I think Dragapult VMAX is absolutely an incredible choice in a lot of the metagame. It beats most of the decks available, and it's a very skill-based deck when it comes to placing damage counters with Max Phantom and quick shooting. So there's a lot of cool plays. So if you're looking to grow as a player, this is really one of those decks that I would take. Honestly, the deck is all about spreading, Crushing Hammer, Path to the Peak. I really see this as a top 3 deck, not changing too much. And the fact that there's other dark decks within this range shows you how strong this deck truly is. So if you're looking for a deck to pick, this is one of my personal picks. Catapulting into our number 1 spot, previously from number 3, is Single Strike Urshifu Umbreon VMAX. This is really one of the decks that I had a gut feeling is going to be the best deck in format sometime. I thought when Battle Styles was coming out, this would just be the de facto best deck, not realizing that it needed a little bit more. Umbreon VMAX seemed to be that little bit more that it needed, adding another type to the deck, adding gusting to the deck, and now having the abilities, so you have Single Strike Urshifu VMAX can knock at anything with its G-Max one blow. I can go through anything, including Zamazenta Vs and other things. You got Umbreon VMAX that can gust things up, hit things hard. Honestly, this is just the best deck in format if you think about it. It has everything going on with all these different attributes. If you were to make a pro-con list, of course it would be like, this deck, it might be a little bit inconsistent at times or stuff like that. Sure, most decks will have that, but when you put the pros like can go through anything, can OHKO anything in format, can get free gust up on your opponent's Pokemon, does have energy acceleration, can get cards back, can have damage modifiers to increase your damage, does have extra draw power. It's really one of those things where this list far surpasses any other deck. So if we're looking at it to what this deck brings to this table, it certainly brings a lot. This list is absolutely fantastic. For a lot of people, they do play Tool Jammer in the deck. I like Tool Scrapper in the deck for what it's worth, because a lot of players are now packing Tool Scrapper. So if you go Tool Jammer, and they scrapper away your Tool Jammer, it's just gone. I'd rather be able to instantly use Tool Scrapper if necessary. So I really like this deck. Number 1 for right now. Don't necessarily think it's going to fall too much. Might be number 1 again next week. So again, it's one of those decks. If you're not playing this, play Dragapult. And if you're not playing Dragapult, I'd be playing this. Top 2 decks in my opinion. Top 2 decks calculated out. Awesome list overall. And that's what we got going on with this list today, peeps. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I'm sure there's going to be some peeps that got some stuff to say about it, and leave that in the comments. I love getting back to every single person. I recently just got back from a trip, so I will currently be getting back to everyone a little bit quicker than I have over this weekend. And I try to stay active whenever possible. I mean, when I say like I'm inactive, I'm like 24 hours to respond to a message in the comments. Now I'm probably going to be multiple times a day. So again, I love to hear back from everyone. Putting comments below does really help boost the YouTube algorithm and really helps me out. You could also do it by doing likes. So whether or not you want to become, if you want to help me out as a channel content creator, it's the freest way to do it. Leaving likes and commenting below. Also subscribing certainly helps if you're new to the channel, or if you just somehow magically forgot to subscribe all this time, be sure to check it out if you haven't already. I've certainly done that to a lot of my friends, and I'm just like, what? I didn't subscribe to you? I've literally watched you forever. I'm so sorry. Heck, I just, you know what I'm saying? It's one of those things where, anyways, I also launched a Patreon and my YouTube memberships recently. You can check that out in the description. If you want to support me as a content creator, get early access to all of these deck lists and other deck lists. I have hundreds of deck lists, and I upgrade all my deck lists on a weekly basis, or whenever they're relevant deck lists on a weekly basis. It would really help me as a content creator if you could show some support there. Again, if you can't, like, subscribes, all that great stuff really helps out the commenting, and just sharing my stuff. That's another great way to help me. But if you do want to financially support me and get access to my deck lists and my thoughts and all that kind of stuff, hit me up. I also do offer Pokemon TCG coaching. So with PTCG Live coming up in our new formats, if you are looking for coaching, I'm currently offering a deal. Feel free to DM me about it, either on Twitter or on Discord. Both of my links are below to join the Discord or just at me on Twitter. I can totally get back to you and explain that. Personal one-on-one coaching. I even have availability as early as this week, trying to ramp that up a little bit. Again, I appreciate all the love and support, everyone. Thank you so much for watching this video. Have yourself a great week, and I can't wait to show you some other great content that I have planned for this week. I want to give a huge shout out to everyone who's become a channel member. It's one of those things where I appreciate every single person who watches my videos, and I mean, that's really where it counts, but for the channel members, they've gone out of their way to financially support me, and I truly appreciate that gesture. It's one of those things when I started channel memberships up on my channel, and I just didn't know if anyone was ever going to do it, so I truly appreciate everyone taking the plunge, taking a leap of trust, and investing in me as a content creator. Truly makes a difference for me each and every month. If you haven't already thought about becoming a channel member, you might want to contribute to the channel, and I do put everything back into the channel to make it the best possible place to watch for Pokemon TCG content. Again, I truly appreciate everyone. Thank you so much. Cheers. I truly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to watch this video. It means the world to me. And my goal with this channel is to spread my love of the game and knowledge with our entire Pokemon TCG community. If you haven't already, help signal boost this video to other Pokemon TCG fans by liking it, sharing it with your friends, and subscribing to the channel. Hopefully we reach our goals really soon. Check out this recommended video, and have yourself a great day. Thanks.